When my mom saw my name on that building, she said, "Is this a joke?" I didn't answer. She walked through the doors I built, sat in a room I designed, and still asked if I needed help paying rent. She never knew I was gone until I came back. My name is Lyra. I'm the 30th second daughter, invisible child. I was the quiet one, the backup plan, the placeholder between her real kids. I didn't speak much. It didn't seem to matter when I did. I used to think maybe if I worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, said yes to every favor, they'd see me. But being useful doesn't make you loved. It just makes you available. My mom was turning 60, big party, big venue, big family energy. My name wasn't on the invitation, but I was expected to show up. Of course, so I did. I worked a double shift the night before, didn't sleep. Took a 5 a.m. train, then an Uber across the city. I wore a dress I'd borrowed from a coworker, heels I hadn't worn in a year, hair pinned, eyes puffy. But I showed up. I brought a gift, something I made. A hand-bound book, letters from people whose lives my mom had touched. Former coworkers, neighbors, old clients, patients from the clinic where she used to work. People who still remembered the way she made them feel 20, 30 years ago. It took me 3 months to track them down, another month to print and bind. The only thing I didn't pay for was my own pride. I didn't have any left. When I walked in, no one looked up. My brother was on his phone. My sister was arguing with her husband about centerpieces. My mom was laughing with her best friend. I smiled, said hello, put the gift on the table. Stood there, waiting. My sister looked over her shoulder and said, "Oh, you made it." Then turned back to whatever she was doing. Someone spilled red wine. It splashed onto the empty chair next to mine. No one cleaned it, so I did. During dinner, my cousin asked if I was still working the night shift at that little clinic. I said yes. He made a face like I'd told him I was cleaning bathrooms. I didn't correct him. I listened as they passed around baby photos, talked about promotions, vacation homes, private schools. My name didn't come up once, not even when my sister said, "We all have to stick together, you know." Everyone nodded. I just kept eating, quiet, forgettable. When it was time for speeches, my mom stood under the chandelier. Glass sparkled behind her. She looked like she was standing inside a memory. She thanked my sister for organizing, my brother for the playlist, my uncle for footing the catering bill. Then she said, "It means everything to be surrounded by people who've always supported me," and looked directly past me. The room clapped. My sister wiped a tear. I took another sip of water, the sparkling kind, because they forgot I don't drink alcohol. When it was time for gifts, she opened them one by one. Perfume, jewelry, a new iPad. She held them up, showed them off, took photos. Then she reached mine, the book. "What's this?" she said, turning it over. "A journal." She flipped through a few pages, didn't read a single one, said, "Love the smell of paper," then set it down like it had no weight. My brother said, "Etsy?" Someone laughed. I said, "No, I made it." He blinked. "You made a book?" My mom chuckled. Lyra likes her little projects. That word again, little. It didn't sting, it didn't shock, it just emptied something inside me. My sister asked if I'd driven down. I said no. She said, "Oh, so you're still, figuring things out?" I didn't respond. Someone passed out slices of cake. People gathered for pictures. I wasn't asked to join. I sat there holding a fork, watching them pose. My mom looked radiant. I looked like I didn't belong, because I didn't. After an hour, I got up, told my sister I had an early shift. She said, "You always do." I didn't hug my mom, didn't ask her if she liked the book, didn't remind her that I'd spent weeks making it. I didn't slam the door, I didn't say goodbye, I just left. and no one came after me. The wind outside felt colder than I expected. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, watched my breath cloud in the air. Then I walked to the station. Not one text, not one missed call, not even the usual, "Let us know you got home safe." I turned off my phone that night, slept with the windows open, listened to the silence. It was the first time I felt warm in weeks. They didn't know I was already fading. That party was just the final thread snapping. You don't always notice when something breaks. Sometimes it just stops working. I'd been the quiet one for so long. But they didn't know what silence can build. They thought they were forgetting me, but I was the one erasing them. I didn't move out right away. I just stopped showing up, stopped answering texts, stopped picking up when they called. After that party, I finished my last 2 shifts at the clinic, gave notice, sold most of what I owned on Facebook Marketplace, bought a bus ticket, and disappeared. No grand plan, no dramatic farewell, just distance and space. I landed in a city I'd only seen in brochures, rented a room in a house with 3 strangers and 1 broken water heater, worked the overnight shift at a diner, spent the day at the library. I was so tired I didn't have time to miss anyone. The money was tight, but the silence was clean. No judgment, no noise, just me. I found a community college a few miles away. Night classes, cheap, anonymous. I signed up for 1 course, then 2, then 5. I cleaned houses on weekends, walked dogs between lectures, did surveys online, drove delivery at night, stacked shifts like bricks, didn't complain. I slept on a mattress on the floor, ate canned soup for a month, stretched every dollar until it cracked. I didn't tell anyone where I went, didn't post on social media, didn't send Christmas cards. I blocked their numbers, not out of spite, out of survival. They hadn't noticed when I was present. They didn't deserve a chance to miss me when I was gone. 3 years passed. I got a degree, a real one. Business and systems design. I built a freelance profile, started with $5 logo designs, wrote copy for websites, set up back-end systems for small shops. My first big client was a woman who sold vintage chairs out of her garage. She paid me $300 to build her a site and help her organize her invoices. Then she told 5 of her friends. Then their friends told theirs. By year 4, I was making more in a week than I used to in a month, still living small, still invisible. But the balance in my bank account was the loudest thing I owned. I moved into a studio apartment with a working heater, bought real silverware, a 2nd pair of shoes. No one knew, no one asked. Sometimes I'd look up my sister's Instagram. She posted pictures of beach vacations, champagne flutes, hashtags about boss babe energy, all paid for by her husband's family. My brother had a baby. They named her after my grandmother, a name I had wanted to use. He didn't tell me. I found out from a mutual friend who still thought we talked. My mom posted a photo of the birthday book, the one I made, in the background of a bookshelf, still wrapped, still unopened. I started keeping a journal, not the kind with glitter and prompts, just a plain black notebook. Every time I made money, learned a new skill, or reached a goal, I wrote it down. But I didn't tell anyone. There's a power in building something no one can see. It becomes yours, whole, untouched. I built a platform for small businesses, tools for invoicing, inventory, automated emails. It started as a side project. It turned into a subscription model. By the end of year 5, I had 12,000 users. Some paid monthly, some paid yearly, some sent thank you notes. None knew my full name. I kept it that way. I didn't go back for holidays, didn't send texts on birthdays, didn't explain. The truth is, they never asked. People say blood is thicker, but I've learned water is cleaner. There was no revenge, no rage, just stillness. The the kind that grows when you stop begging. I got an email one morning from a software firm offering to buy me out. 7 figures, more money than my entire family had made in a decade. I didn't reply, not right away. I went for a walk, same trail I always used, same tree stump where I used to sit and drink cheap coffee. I sat there that day, thinking of my mom's voice, her laughter when I said I made a book, her hand waving it off like dust on a table. I closed my eyes, heard nothing, felt everything. Then I stood up, walked home, and sold the company. Not because I needed the money, but because I was ready to start something new. Just mine. I rented an office downtown, top floor, big windows, quiet walls. I didn't put my name on the sign, didn't share the address, didn't post a thing. But I built again. Hired 2 interns, then 4 staff, then 16. I started a fund, not for startups, not for influencers, for women who worked night shifts, for students with no one to co-sign a loan, for people who ate canned soup and didn't complain. It didn't make headlines, that was the point. By the time my name was printed in a trade magazine, 5 years had passed. My hair was longer, my spine was straighter, and I hadn't spoken to my family in 1,862 days. No one asked where I went, no one knocked on the door, but one day they would. And when they did, they wouldn't find the version of me they remembered. I wasn't gone, I was rebuilding alone, and stronger than they'd ever imagined. The first message came from my sister, a single word. Hey, I didn't answer. 2 days later, do you have a minute? Still no reply. Then came the voicemail from my brother. He sounded different, slower, like he was thinking before speaking. Something he'd never done before. He said our mother had a fall. Not fatal, but serious enough that the hospital called him. She was in recovery, and she'd asked for me. I waited. That night, I listened to the message again and again, trying to hear what wasn't being said. She hadn't slipped, she'd collapsed, alone. I booked a flight, not because I missed them, not because I forgave them, just because I was ready. When I landed, the air smelled the same. The streets hadn't changed, but I had. I took a cab straight to the hospital, didn't stop to visit anyone, didn't call ahead. She was asleep when I walked in, pale, still, thinner than I remembered. A nurse passed me her chart without question. Assumed I was family. Technically, I still was. Her room was filled with flowers, cards, but no people, only silence. I sat in the chair beside her bed, looked at the wrinkles around her mouth, same mouth that used to talk over me. She stirred, then blinked, then looked at me like I was a ghost. Lyra? I nodded. She smiled, then cried, then tried to sit up, but winced. You came, she said. I didn't answer. She started talking fast, saying how hard things had been, how proud she was, how sorry she felt. I watched her lips move, didn't interrupt, didn't comfort. She asked if I was still doing freelance stuff, said, I always knew you'd find your way. That was the first lie. Then she asked if I could stay a few days, help around the house, talk to the doctors, said, no one else really knows how to handle things. That was the second. I told her I'd think about it. She looked relieved, grateful, hopeful. I felt nothing. Later that evening, I stopped by my sister's house. She opened the door with fake surprise. Lyra, wow, look at you. I looked the same, just carried differently. Inside, everything was too bright, too loud, too curated. Her husband offered me wine. I declined. My sister said I should come to dinner Sunday. Said everyone would be there. Said Mom would love it. I nodded once, didn't say yes. She asked if I'd moved back. I said no. She asked what I'd been doing. I said, working? She smiled too wide. Still the quiet one, huh? I looked at the gold watch on her wrist. Same one she once said was too expensive for me to touch. I said nothing. At dinner, they circled me like I was a lottery ticket. My brother pulled me aside, said he was starting a business, something in real estate. Said he just needed a bit of funding, said we should partner. I asked what he knew about real estate. He said, "You hire people to know things." I told him I wasn't interested. He said, "But you have money, right?" I smiled, didn't blink, then turned away. My sister sent a text that night, said Mom's medical bills were piling up, that she didn't want to ask, but could I help? I didn't reply. My mom called the next morning, left a message about reconnecting, about how family means everything, about how much she missed me. I remembered her saying, "Lyra likes her little projects." I remembered the silence after I walked away. Now they spoke like nothing happened, like I hadn't been gone for years, like I didn't vanish because of them. I went back to the hospital, stood in the hallway, outside her room. A nurse walked past me and said, "Your daughter's been here every day?" She meant my sister. I stepped inside. My mom lit up when she saw me, said I looked like a CEO, asked if I was married, then said, "Don't wait too long, dear." I stood by the window, watched birds fight over a crumb. She told me about her friends, how they used to brag about their kids, said she never knew what to say about me. Then she laughed, said, "I guess now I've got a story." I looked at her. She didn't look guilty. She looked pleased, like I was something she could finally show off. Another trophy, another item to mention in passing. She asked if I'd thought about moving back, said the neighborhood was still safe, said there was a house for sale down the street. I said, "I already have a place." She asked where. I didn't answer. She asked what I did. I said, "It's complicated." She asked how much I made. I smiled. Then she said, "I wasn't always the best mom, but I tried." That was the third lie. I sat down, looked at her hands, same hands that clapped for everyone but me. I said, "You didn't fail because you were tired. You failed because I wasn't useful to you." She blinked. I said it again, slower. Then I stood up, walked to the door. She said, "You're angry." I said, "No, I'm not yours anymore." And I meant it. I didn't go back to the hospital, didn't send flowers, didn't leave a note. They had their reunion, their photos, their pretend peace. I had something else. A week later, I got a letter, handwritten, from my uncle. He said he was revising his will, said he wanted someone responsible to handle it, someone who knew what it meant to be left out. He asked if I would be executor, said my name came to him in a dream, said he remembered the time I gave him soup during a snowstorm, when no one else bothered to call. I hadn't thought of that day in years, but I remembered it clearly. He'd been shivering. I brought a blanket too. No one had thanked me. Until now. I accepted. 6 months passed. Then he died. I flew back in, quietly. Handled the paperwork, signed every page, filed every copy. My family showed up for the reading, all dressed in black, smiling like widows in a play. The lawyer read the names, spoke slowly, precisely. My brother was left nothing. My sister got a framed photograph, one she wasn't in. My mother, she received a single book, the same birthday book I once gave her, returned to her, wrapped again. I watched her face as she unwrapped it. At first, confusion, then silence, then something close to shame. She looked at me, eyes wide, mouth shut. I didn't smile. The lawyer continued. The estate, the house, the stocks, the savings, it was all going to one person. Me. No one clapped, no one spoke. I left before they could. Back in the city, I called a locksmith, changed the locks on the house I now owned. Not to live in, just to remind them I could. My brother called a few days later, asked if I could help with the down payment. Said his credit wasn't great. Said he had a family to think of. I told him I know what it's like to not qualify, then hung up. My sister emailed, said she was thinking of going back to school, wanted advice, maybe a small investment. I replied with a link to a public scholarship fund, didn't personalize it, didn't sign my name. My mother sent a letter, 3 pages long, apologies, memories. Lines like, "You were always stronger than I realized." I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, didn't answer. I started writing new checks, not to them, to people like me. I funded a shelter for women in transition. I paid for 2 students' tuition. I sent laptops to kids with none. No press, no credit, just action. The next time I saw my mother, it was accidental. She was leaving a pharmacy. I was parked across the street. She looked older, slower, carrying too many bags. She paused at the curb, waited for help. No one stopped. I could have rolled down the window, could have called her name. Instead, I watched, and then drove away. They thought I was lost, that I disappeared because I broke. But I didn't break. I rebuilt, quietly, deliberately, completely. They still tell people I'm distant, that I changed, that I became cold. Let them. They never noticed when I was warm. Why should they feel entitled to my fire now? One day I got a call from my cousin Mira, the one they all mocked. Too loud, too strange, too queer. She asked to meet for coffee, said she was starting a small community garden, said she needed a bit of help with zoning permits and setup costs. I showed up the next day with a binder, helped her form an LLC, found her a grant, bought the first 10 bags of soil. She cried. I didn't. I visited her garden twice a month after that, never told anyone. Her name is in my will now, not because of revenge, but because some people remember kindness, and some don't deserve a second chance. I didn't post photos, didn't update anyone, just lived. I started reading again, walked without headphones, ate slowly. I bought a second apartment, rented it for below market value to a single mother and her son. They left a thank you card on my doorstep every Christmas. The boy calls me Miss E. He doesn't know my story. He just knows the lights always stay on. And the fridge stays full. Years passed, the calls stopped, the begging turned quiet, then silent. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I just wasn't theirs anymore. I didn't burn bridges, I just stopped walking back. If you've ever experienced this, share. Thank you for staying until the end.